And I'm going to share my slide. So there you go. So welcome everyone. On the chat, please, put your name. If you have a reference, you can put there. You can put your pronouns or which country you're calling from. And even if share, what makes you so interested in today's session. All that will have value for as we go along with the discussions and even the conversations moving forward. Just a little bit about the center. I want to start off by sharing the Center for Global Inclusion has been in existence for over 5 years. Last year, we hit our 5th year anniversary. And our mission is all about serving as a resource for research and education for individuals and organizations in the area of DEI across the globe. And this is something that we're quite proud of, and we ensure that we are doing this and try to be as effective as possible. So the webinars is one of those ways where we try to reach out and offer whatever research and education that we can do. As I mentioned before we begin, just like in any case, all of you are familiar, but it's good to just share that for people who need to know. I mentioned about the fact that, if you prefer to not be on video, that's fine with us, but we would require you to stay on mute if you're not speaking, so at least it doesn't disturb anyone else. There's a reaction button. Please use that in the event that you wish to, raise your hand or get people's attention on a matter, or even celebrate a comment or anything of that sort. I mentioned about the closed captioning and the fact that you can actually choose a language. We will record the session, and like I said, the chat, I will be sharing information down there, so please refer to that. You will be entitled to actually save the chat as well. And again, once again, I'll share that information. But if you're familiar, just go to the chat, and there are 3 little buttons below. Click on that, and you'll see the Save Chat button. So after the session, you can actually save that onto your device. Just understand that we recognize that there are different comfort levels for people with technology. So when we do virtual participation, just be patient and to a large extent be understanding. And finally, recordings will be sent, and I will share with you the email that you can start off with regard to recordings. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our guest speaker. Well, he's no guest to a lot of people, I know, but certainly he is to others who have just joined, and is Gamiel Yafai, who is, he has his own company, and he is the founder and CEO to Diversity Marketplace, an organization established in 2005. He's currently and presently the board member to the Center for Global Inclusion. We're very happy and pleased and proud of him. And he's been a very active member with us. He's also an expert panelist to the GDIB, which is the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion benchmarks, of which Gamiel will be sharing a little bit insights into that. And I will also be sharing some of the links on the chat if you're not sure about that. And he has been notable in sitting in many boards, most recently as a trust and member of the governance and HR committee, the Parks Trust, Milton Keynes. He's from the United Kingdom, but he has a very, very interesting background. I will let him say a little bit more about that. And those of you wondering about the background music earlier on, well, that was in reference to Gamiel's background. Part of his background is from Yemen, and I was sharing some Yemeni traditional music, which was extremely wonderful to hear. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Gamiel, and over to you. Oh, by the way, I'm your moderator. So if there's anything you need to reach out or ask any questions, feel free to use the chat and I will respond as soon as I can. Thank you.
Sudeep, good evening from the UK, and thank you for that lovely introduction. As Sudeep says, my name's Gamiel Yafai, and I've been a diversity and inclusion strategist now for 23 years. I first got involved by collaborating with the Commission for Racial Equality in the UK to promote the amendment to the Race Relations Act, which basically opened the door for organisations to introduce positive action or affirmative action in the UK. So we've had access to positive action for 23 years. But have we moved forward? I would say yes, we've moved forward, but very, very slowly. So firstly, I'd like to say thank you all for taking the time to join us this evening. And I say evening, it's 9 o'clock in PM in the UK. I'm sure it's morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. But yes, thank you for taking the time. This is a topic that, that we're all talking about. You will have seen the growth in awareness, in conversations, in arguments, in opportunities, in challenges throughout your organizations. And really, the privilege this evening is mine because I've managed to, tick off one of the things on my bucket list. And one of the things on my bucket list was to have more of a global impact, using the knowledge and skills that I've acquired over the last 23 years. And that impact is through the Centre for Global Inclusion. And what it's done is it's given me the opportunity to, to support an organization that offers free research, free tools, free education, and by free tools, I'm talking about the Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Benchmark, which, unlike any other benchmark, is free to use and to download. So please, I'll be talking more about it later on, but please explore and you will find it. It's one of those tools that you will wonder why you didn't start using 10 years ago. So as Sudeep sort of mentioned, I'm Yemeni by background, and if I just give you a bit of sort of context behind that, my father was a farmer in Yemen that came to the UK in the 50s. My mother was born in Scotland in the UK. Her mother was half Scottish, half Irish, and her father was born in Hyderabad in India. And the other bonus for me was that his father was also born in the Yemen. So I have two links to the Yemen from both my mother's and my father's side, which I see as not just my added advantage when joining or when working with organizations, but I see it as my bicultural competency, my understanding of two different cultures, my understanding of two different religions, and possibly more, and my experiences of living in a country that was probably considered to be third world. And then I'll explain that a bit more. So growing up in Birmingham, I started to get into trouble when I was about 10. And just before my 11th birthday, by getting into trouble, where I was talking about breaking into cars with friends, stealing lead off of church roofs and selling it to ironmongers or but yeah, my dad decided that enough was enough. Yemen was the place for me. So he told my mother that he would take me on a 6-week holiday to Yemen. 6 months later, my father decided to come back and decided that I should stay there. And 2.5 years later, I actually came back from the Yemen. And in the Yemen, I lived in a village, and the village had no gas, no electricity, and no water. That was my first experiences of inequalities, but really the biggest inequality that I experienced in Yemen was gender inequality, and how boys were treated differently to girls, and how men were allowed to work. Women weren't allowed to drive, they weren't allowed to work unless it was in the markets. But there was huge inequalities, and I would say I probably experienced more discrimination in the Yemen as being half Yemeni than I've experienced anywhere else in my life. But all of that, as I say, set me up nicely to move into the world of diversity and inclusion. And currently, as I run an organization called Diversity Marketplace. We have a team of DE&I researchers, strategists, facilitators, trainers, and auditors that explore the world of diversity, but share that with our clients. So this evening, what I'd like to do is share with you a fair bit of my knowledge and experience, and look at the current landscape, and look at what's happening, and have discussions around various areas of diversity. In the last session, after the first hour, we still had 77 people talking to us for another 45 minutes. I'd send Sudeep a text to say, can we stop now, please? Not because I was tired, but I knew that we had this one coming up. So again, in sharing my experiences, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to me, and to a lot of my fellow practitioners, is just good, exemplar business practice. It's what we should be doing. We shouldn't need to explain the business case for diversity and inclusion. We just need to look at the challenges and the experiences that we're having in the workplace at the moment. Things like recruitment, retention, development, promotion, and the gaps and inequalities that exist in all four of those areas, and that can all be filled by being more equitable in the way that we approach diversity, equity, diversity and inclusion. I always ask the question, why is there so little diversity in organizations when we've been working on this for decades? Why are our customers going elsewhere? They're going elsewhere because we don't understand their needs, and we do not have the staff makeup that's representative of them, who would also understand their needs. Why are women leaving our workplaces twice as fast as men? What are the inequalities that are happening? Do we dig deeply enough? Do we understand the different cultural experiences that they're having compared to senior leaders? We have, in some organizations, they will have 30, 35, maybe even 40% of their workforce from different ethnic minority communities. Yet, they're not achieving that diversity of, that cognitive diversity of innovation, thinking, and creativity. And you ask yourself, well, we have that diversity, so what's happening? What's happening is that diversity in the main is at the lower levels of the organization, and who are not using, they're not being put into decision-making positions in order to change the status quo, change the way organizations operate, change the way they engage with their customers, change the way they engage with their staff, change the way they engage with their managers. And that is a problem. What we tend to have in organizations where you have huge levels or high levels of diversity is you'll experience low levels of inclusion. And we find that in most organizations that we go in and do research in. We find that individuals from different diverse backgrounds in middle management experience the culture of the organization so differently to those from a homogenous group. You have the inherent culture, which is the majority, and then you'll have the shadow and hidden cultures, which are the cultures that are experienced by individuals who are from a minority background. All of this has to change, and so much more. And we do that through conscious inclusion, where everybody has a role to play. And I'll explain more about that shortly. But one thing I do want to sort of share with you, and let me just bring up my slides. So hopefully you can see my slides. I will share all of the slides with you. There's a few of my customers there, but I'll move on to the next, but they will be on the slides when you receive them. I do a lot of collaborating with an organization called DE&I Leaders in the UK. And again, we've just finished our global benchmarking survey of DE&I leaders. I think this time it was around about 340 DE&I leaders globally, to find out what's changing, what their challenges were last year, and what they're moving into. And I can honestly say that one of the biggest changes that we are experiencing, and a lot of from the conversations with a lot of our clients, is the movement from what I call initiative-itis. And initiative-itis is literally organizations that do not have a strategy, or may have a strategy, but it's really not worth the paper it's printed on. The strategy will literally be a page with no real actions, and more or less it's a statement rather than a strategy. And what tends to happen is they will move from initiative to initiative. So they may do unconscious bias training and wonder why it's not working, because they're not implementing an action plan for reviewing their policies, their practices, their procedures in terms of unconscious bias. So they'll just do the training and hope that everything's going to change for the better. It doesn't happen. We have to be systematic in our approach. And again, other initiatives like reverse mentoring, fantastic if there's follow on and follow through. But also organizations just focusing on gender and thinking that the world's going to change, or focusing on race, or focusing just on one element of diversity strands. We have to, and this is my ask to you, we have to focus on our intersectionality. And I'll talk more about the intersectionality later. But if you think about all of us, we all have what we, in the UK, we call them protected characteristics, or diversity strands, diversity, dimensions, or diversity identities, many, many names. But we all have an age, we all have an ethnicity, we all have a sexual orientation, we all have a religion and belief or no religion, and we all have a gender. So this is about all of us, and we all need to be included on this agenda, because it will impact on us at some phase of our lifetime. So let's focus on it now and get it right for our kids as well. So as I say, the big shift is that move away from the initiative-itis and focus on systematic changes in organizations where the whole organization is reviewed. And what I mean by that is, there's a focus on governance and operations and, things like diversity on boards. Let's really challenge ourselves and look in the mirror and go, okay, so is this reflective of the staff that we want to work for us? And is this reflective of the communities who, consist of our employees, our managers, our customers, our stakeholders, and everybody else? Are we representative? Because if we're not, we are going to miss out in spades. Another part of governance is matrix, diversity and inclusion matrices. What are we monitoring, measuring, and managing? How do we know that we're going to move from where we are to where we want to be? 23 years I've been doing this, and I can tell you some organizations haven't really moved that far at all. So the other area is culture and leadership. How are leaders displaying their inclusiveness? And are they talking about it internally, externally? Are they talking on social media? What are they doing? Then attraction and recruitment. How are we recruiting? Are we still recruiting the same way that we've always recruited? Have we really started to embed the mitigation of the biases that we found we've had? And then employee experiences. In most staff surveys, you will get lots of information that tells you that there is a problem in your organization. Whether you are underrepresented or whether or not your staff from different backgrounds experience some form of discrimination. How often do we act on that information? Again, questions that you need to be thinking about, because if we don't start acting on them, again, we're going to be left behind as organizations. Other organizations are going to move so far ahead of us. And one of the interesting findings from the research that we did with DE&I leaders, and that research should be available in March, but it highlighted the business pressures from the perspective of external stakeholders, external influences, for example, competitors, procurement, industry standards, compliance, and also the economic and the social and the technological, legal and environmental issues that impact your staff, which will impact you as an organization. And then there's the big one for me is communication, which cuts across every part of that. How do we communicate effectively? You see, when we start to look systematically at diversity, equity, and inclusion within our organization and embed it into all of our processes, procedures, and policies, that's when we start to get things right. However, many clients, when they come to Diversity Marketplace, will actually say, we are at the start of our journey, which is always an interesting sort of statement, because for me, as long as they've employed people, they have been on this journey. And as you know, one of my clients started in 1436. Quite an interesting organization, but they've been doing diversity since 1436. They just haven't been intentional in their approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that is the big challenge. Yes, we may be doing stuff, but are we being intentional? Are we really making a difference? So I'm going to share a slide now, which literally answers that question. When organizations say to me, yep, we're at the start of our journey, I always say to them, how do you know where you are? And that question actually baffles them because they don't know where they are, because they've done no research, they've done no audit, they literally are guessing at where they are. As a business, you can't afford to guess where you are. You can't afford to be behind your competitors because your competitors are speeding up on this journey. So I always refer them to the Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Benchmark, which again is housed within the Centre for Global Inclusion, and it is totally free to use. So the Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Benchmark, I see as an audit tool, and I use it as an audit tool to explore 15 categories of an organization. And those 15 categories are split into 4 groups. And these 4 groups are vital in order to progress diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the first group is the foundation. And really that is about, the group is for creating foundations within your organization, the foundations from which, you will grow and develop your practices. And they focus on driving strategy, making strategy come alive, making it real. And that's through the vision, or it's through auditing and being able to demonstrate evidence that shows that you are, thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion through your vision, your strategies, your business impact, your leadership and accountability, your DE&I structure and implementation. It looks for evidence. And if you don't have evidence, then you're not doing it. As somebody said to me the other day, if you can't see it, feel it, smell it, it doesn't exist. And that's become my benchmark when I'm working with clients around the audit. If they can't prove that it exists, then they've got no evidence to demonstrate that they're achieving, different levels across the GDEIB. So the first one, as I said, is foundation. The second one is internal. And internal focuses on evidence to support inclusive recruitment, inclusive advancement and retention, inclusive job design, classifications and compensation, and inclusive work-life integration, flexibility, and benefits. And then you have the bridging. The bridging is about bringing everything together. How do we make sure that we fill the gaps? How do we make sure that we promote what we're doing from an inclusive perspective? So bridging is about aligning and connecting. So in terms of assessments, measurements, and research, how do we know how our staff are feeling? Do we just do the standard staff survey or engagement survey? But we've started to do so much more in terms of pulse surveys, in terms of culture surveys, in terms of focus groups, and and webinars to assess how people are feeling. And then how do we make sure that internally, and I would say internally, everybody knows what's going on? One of the biggest faults I find with most organizations is they do not know about the good practice. Not that they do not know, they do not share good practice that happens in their organizations on a daily basis. They don't report it, they don't house it, they don't visualize it. On your website, how much do you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion? But how much lived experience do you incorporate into any of your external comms around what your staff and your people are doing to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion? And then, in terms of gaps in knowledge, that's where learning and development comes in. And then how do we bring it all together? And how do we make sure that this happens on a regular basis, that it continues to flow, consistently? And we do that by focusing on sustainability. There is such an intrinsic link between diversity, equity, and inclusion and ESGs. It's there for all of us to see. And then we've got the external, and the external is about listening to and serving society. So this is outward facing. And again, how do you demonstrate diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of the communities, the government relations and philanthropy, or the CSR that actually happens in your organization? And the services and products that you develop, how do you ensure that they're inclusive? But also, how do you ensure that they meet the needs of customers? In the UK, we have a retail organization called Tesco's. It may not be as big as Walmart, but it's big in the UK. And 25 years ago, they ran a very simple focus group with Asian communities that worked for them. And there were only 12 people in the room. But in that meeting, it was more or less a focus group. They were introducing local stores. And they asked these 12 individuals, and they said, we're opening local stores in your communities. What is it that we need to have in those stores that will meet the needs of your communities? And one individual says, I have to travel an hour and a half to get my spices. It would be brilliant if we had spices in our local store. And I'm sure you know what happened. Yes, they had spices in their local store and in their local supermarket. And it went from 1 shelf to 10 shelves to 20 shelves. And now there are whole aisles of ethnic foods in the supermarkets and in the local stores. The people that know what your customers want are your customers. And if you can reflect your customers in your staff base, you will move a long, long way, and you will be more creative, innovative. And the next one is marketing. Marketing and customer service. How do we make that more inclusive? And I'll share with you how you can make it more inclusive shortly, but also procurement and responsible sourcing, but diversifying your sourcing. How do you evidence that? Very few organizations evidence it at the moment. But what I'd like to do next is we're going to be using Mentimeter today, and only for a few of our questions. And I'll explain how Mentimeter works in a moment. So, firstly, either on your phones or on your laptops, I would like you to enter menti.com. And Sudeep, if you wouldn't mind entering or sharing menti.com and the code with everybody, please. So the code, so menti.com, as soon as you enter menti.com, it'll ask you for the code. So in any browser you have, it should work. And the code is 33425222. As soon as you've entered that, you will find that it will ask you a question. And I will share more about the Global Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Benchmark in a moment.
I've shared it, Gamiel, on the chat already.
Thank you very much. So I know I can see some of you have already joined. So menti.com, the code 33425222. And then you bring up a question. Why do you think diversity, equity, and inclusion, is important to be driven in your organization. So Menti is totally anonymous. We do not capture anybody's name, anybody's contact details. It is highly sort of anonymous. So please share with us why you think. And what we will do is combine what you've said with what everybody else said in the last session and send those to you so that you've got, information from Mentimeter and that you can share to build your own business case, because this is about the business case. And what it highlights is, and let me just read some of these out. Give people a voice, to have more innovative ideas, bring out ideas, thoughts freely, represent all of our people, to respond to a growing global and diverse workforce and workplace, represent our customer base, be better, to better reflect the communities we serve, create communities of belonging. And we need to represent our stakeholders, members, countries, and most of you will be in different countries because it's too late. If it was too late, believe me, I wouldn't still be doing this now. We've still got a long ways to go, but I genuinely believe that we are making difference. And we are making a difference. We've just got to make it faster. We've seen such an increase in awareness over the last 4 years. We need to change that awareness into action. And that's going to be key. Represent the community that yourself and give more equitable experience, talent retention, an issue on most people's agenda, acknowledge different perspectives. So those are just, thank you all for sharing, and we will share these with you. So the next piece, I want to follow on from, the global, where are you in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And again, you may be at the start of your journey, you may be, further along, but do you really know where you are? With the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion benchmark, as I say, it is not a benchmark that benchmarks you against any other organization. What it does is it creates a benchmark to say, this is where you are, and this is how you've evidenced where you are on a good diversity practice maturity matrix. And this is the matrix. So level 1 is inactive. So no DE&I work has begun. So basically, it's just not on your radar. In fact, you're not really here if you're on 1. Level 2 is reactive. You have a compliant mindset, but you are only following legislation, customs, traditions, religion, or a professional body that says you need to be doing this. So you are so reactive. Anything beyond that, you're not doing. So it's the minimum requirements. Level 3 is proactive. And this is about having clear awareness of why diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important. And you're starting to implement it systematically, i.e., you are looking at everything you do and starting to create measurements for where you are now, or matrices for where you are now, where you want to be, and how you're going to get there. And you're starting to, at level 4 is progressive. So you're starting to see results as a result of the work that you're doing. So you're implementing DE&I systematically. And you are showing either improvements, outcomes. Some of those outcomes might be negative, but what they will do is highlight gaps. And if you've got data, you can go back and fill those gaps. So level 5 is best practice. And by best practice, it's you're exemplar. You are doing what you need to do. you are leading in your industry, you are talking, writing, showcasing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and people are coming to you for advice and help. And you may even win a few awards along the way. So this is the maturity matrix. My question to you is, where do you think your organization is on this maturity matrix? I always get excited when people put level 1. I love the honesty. But it also shows that they're going to have if they start working on this, they will have an adventure that is equal to none. As I say, I've been fortunate enough to do this for such a long time, but my level of knowledge around diversity, equity, and inclusion is that much. There are no experts in this area. I probably know that much more than other people, but there's this much to learn. And that journey, I learn every single day. I'm more excited about what I do now than I was 23 years ago. I mean, a lot more excited. This is such a pleasurable area to work in, a very frustrating area, but it can be so rewarding. I'll share with you, I wake up every single morning knowing that I'm going to make a difference. And I can't imagine another job that would give you that level of satisfaction. So thank you for sharing. And it just shows that, you're fairly realistic in terms of where you are at the moment. Most organizations that I've worked with are in level 2, moving into level 3. They're not quite, as advanced in level 3 as they could be, but this is quite reflective. So where do you want to be on this maturity matrix? I'm assuming that because you've taken time out to come to this session, that you're here for improvement. You're here to grow your knowledge. You're here to share, your knowledge with other people. And instantly, we can see that, there is only one place to be, but you need time to get there. So for those of you that were on level 1 or level 2, yes, it's going to take time to get to level 3 or level 4, and even more time to get to level 5. But it is one heck of a journey to get there. But thank you for sharing, and please keep adding to this. What I'd really like to know is, what are you going to do to move from where you are to where you want to be? There is a very, very simple solution, which I will add once you've started typing in. Measure. I have a long road of learning and personal growth. I still have a long road of learning and personal growth myself, but I'm learning every day. Continuous team learning, board staff, volunteers, patrons, persevere. Perseverance is great, but it is about making sure we can drive things, and we do drive things. Okay, ask for guidance, be intentional about DE&I and actually do it. Continue my knowledge. One thing that I'm missing from here, which is probably the simplest solution, I know most of you have put benchmarking, but nobody has actually put use the GDEIB yet. And that is one of the simplest ways. As I said earlier, it is a free tool. It's yours to use when and if and when you want to use it. But it is probably one of the most comprehensive ways of reaching your journey. Thank you very much for the last person on the list. So let's go back to the slides. And I have this bright light in my eyes because it is almost 10 o'clock in the evening, and it's keeping, I'm not saying it's keeping me awake, but it's making sure that my eyes don't close, if that makes sense. So let me just close this down. So we will be coming back to the Mentimeter, but not yet. So stop sharing. Just want to come back to my slides and share a few other elements of this. So the 15 categories, as I say, you benchmark against each of them, you get a narrative against each one, and then you actually create your own action plan, or you get somebody else to do it for you. So there are many, many barriers to inclusion. But as I mentioned earlier, the biggest barrier is not using what you've already got. And you will have so many resources, so much knowledge, so much experience. You will have individuals with, who are neurodivergent. You'll find that almost 20% of your working population will be neurodivergent. They'll have autism, dyspraxia, ADHD, dyslexia, even Tourette's. But you've never used them. You've never spoken to them. We do not showcase the good things that are happening in the organization, the CSR, the volunteering, and all of that brilliant stuff that your people do on a daily basis. But we don't shout and scream about it. Most of you will not have representation on your websites. That's the quickest win. And that's your biggest barrier, or one of your biggest barriers, is not using what you already have. The other one is psychological safety. And then, not having an inclusive ecosystem where you build knowledge, experience, and you share good practice. And that's where you start to show everybody that they have a role to play. And then data. So let's just quickly look at psychological safety within organizations. And this really is, how people feel, how they experience your organization, how safe they feel to challenge inappropriate behavior, or to say that, they have a better idea, or they have an idea, but they may be fearful that their manager may quash that idea, so they don't even put it forward. Psychological safety is not having to worry about saying something and somebody talking over you, or leaving early because you have childcare responsibilities and you're male. All of these things worry people, and they get worried because they are judged based on who they are. Psychological safety is about being able to uncloak who you are, to be able to talk about your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your religion and belief without pushing it in people's faces, but being able to freely be yourself. And, psychological safety promotes healthier, more productive and more inclusive workplaces or workforces. It provides an environment in which innovation can thrive and creates an environment where people can be add their full contributions and feel that they are being treated equally to everybody else. It reduces staff turnover, but it makes sure that people feel as if they're being valued, respected, and have the opportunity to flourish. How does one feel, in a safe environment? So, and these are some quotes from our research. I feel safe to take risks in my team. We openly share and learn from our mistakes. Questions are always welcome on our team. It's easy to ask my colleagues for help. My unique skills and talents are valued and utilized. It's okay to talk about health issues and burnout, not mental health. I'm not afraid to ask questions and share my thoughts. I feel welcome by my team. So, coming back to everybody's role, everybody has a part to play in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we find is with the organizations we work with, whether or not they have a diversity lead or a diversity team, or sponsors at senior level, and governance of diversity, equity, and inclusion at senior level, and that strategic direction at senior level, whether that's senior management or the board, this is about accountability. It's about creating those safe environments. It's about senior leaders talking about their vulnerabilities, setting the tones and behaviors for everyone to follow. It's about middle managers advocating for the line managers and making sure that they've got as much support as they need, particularly from a human perspective. And not, we talk about soft skills. What are soft skills? We're talking about human skills of empathy, understanding, and compassion, but also skills that tell us that it's okay to make a mistake. We will be corrected, but we will not be chastised because we've made a mistake. We will be given the opportunity to learn. Line managers and supervisors, in terms of, they are ambassadors and change agents, and they encourage their staff to come up with case studies, to talk about their lived experiences, to share with others. And then staff have a responsibility to be either members of employee resource groups or staff networks and allies, and to tell their stories and feel comfortable about telling their stories, because everybody else further up understands that it's important that they do so for the organization to flourish. So everybody talks diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some simple things that they're doing within organizations is not just talk about sort of comms or IT or HR or learning and development. They're starting to use, and let me just go back a bit, they're starting to use inclusive when they're talking about leadership. That when they're talking about inclusive management, or when they're talking about inclusive HR, inclusive marketing, inclusive comms, inclusive learning and development, inclusive IT, inclusive procurement, who are the experts when it comes to marketing in your organization? The experts aren't head of HR or head of diversity. The experts are the head of marketing, and for all other functions, whether it's head of comms or head of learning, head of IT, head of procurement, they are the experts. In the organizations that are thriving, the ownership and responsibility for driving inclusive comms is actually head of comms in their organization. They have to come up with the comms, inclusive comms strategy, not the head of diversity. And the same with marketing. Head of marketing comes up with their inclusive marketing strategy, and head of IT, inclusive IT strategy, inclusive procurement strategy. Everybody takes responsibility. And that is so, so important to drive diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, you will have your diversity team, or you may have a diversity team, you may have employee resource groups, but if you have none of those, one of the most important things to develop is allies. And most of those allies can be throughout the organization. And really, an ally is just someone that supports somebody from a different diversity strand. And we can all be allies. More and more people are becoming allies because they're having more links to other people from different diverse backgrounds. So, for example, 20% of the global population have a disability. Which potentially means that 20% of people in your organizations have disabilities or who are neurodiverse, or have kids or parents who are neurodiverse, or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual. There's such a multitude of links and similarities. The key to all of this is to get to know your people better. You know half of what you think you know about your people. And in order to make sure that you progress, you need data. Data is so important. I'm using an example that a colleague shared with me the other day, Toby Milden. Toby Milden runs his own consultancy, and we collaborate on projects for DE&I leaders. But one of the questions that more and more organizations are starting to put into their staff surveys is, how likely are you to leave within the next 6 months? So, and some people put, are you seriously thinking of leaving the organization because you don't feel respected or that you belong here? And that's the question. And it's, it's an extension to, do you feel you could leave within the next 6 months? Now, if you think about your organization and you think about return on investment, and you think about developing something like a women's development program or progression program, whatever you call it, you think about having data. So let's say you have this data. So you employ 1,000 people, 400 of your workforce are women, or 400 of your workforce are women. 10% of these, which is 40 women, are seriously thinking of leaving. Their average salary is £32,000. Therefore, the cost of turnover, including recruitment costs in terms of, backfilling and ramping up time of them, opportunity costs, you're looking at more than £500,000. Yet, to introduce a program of activity, a serious program of activity to support women, you're probably looking at between £20,000 and £40,000, if that. That is a huge return on investment. Having data means that you can do things and you can progress. There are some quick wins that I will share. I'm just conscious of time, that I will share with you on the slides. So we will send you the slides. However, I've got one final Mentimeter question for you. And that is, bear with me. There are so many simple wins when it comes to diversity and inclusion. What can you do in the next 24 hours to help drive diversity, equity, and inclusion? And as I say, I need to change HEAP to help, and that is my dyslexia, and I notice things after a while, but please bear with me. So what can you do? I'm not going to give you any advice, so please start populating this area, and we will share it with you. Share learning from this session, learn more about it, form a staff DE&I committee. Absolutely. Share this presentation. Change daily behaviors, take action on daily observation. It is so important that we challenge the status quo. If we don't step forward, who's going to? But also, if you step forward, you potentially encourage others to step forward and to call out and to call in. Make sure that individuals from different backgrounds are being seen, heard, and valued. Ask the brave conversations. Always easier said than done. And I always start off new conversations with, tell me about yourself. So people start to tell me about themselves, and they may tell me as much as I want to know. But then my second question is, now tell me a bit more. As soon as you ask that second question, they give you so much more because they feel you genuinely want to know. Use GD benchmark or GDIB benchmark. Honestly, you've got nothing to lose from a free tool, but all to gain. I'm going to stop there. And again, this is a topic that I could talk about for hours. In fact, I already have. But we've just covered a fraction of it. And these are just some really important areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion that we need to be discussing more. You know, all of this is about your own growth, your own development. But the people that succeed in this area see this as self-managed learning. You know, you take responsibility for your own learning and you grow from that. So thank you all very much. I'm going to now pass you back over to Sudeep, but thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gamiel. It was certainly very insightful and rich in knowledge and experience on your side. I think everyone has definitely benefited from it. Just those of you who have to leave, we totally understand, but we are staying back, and we do know that many of you may have questions, would seek clarifications, or would like to even network with each other in some way. This is your opportunity to do so. I already know there are some who already have some questions, and we will start the process. So let's start with Nicole. Nicole, I know you have a question. And remember, please use the reaction button to raise your hand if you wish to orally speak it out. Otherwise, type it on the chat and I'll read it out on your behalf, whichever is your preference. So over to you, Nicole.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Sudeep. Thank you, Gamiel. It's Nicole. I'm calling from Melbourne in Australia. It's the morning, so I'm feeling probably more awake than you are.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi, thank you for sharing all of your thoughts. It was really amazing. I am just wondering with the benchmark,
yeah,
is it possible to use it internally without the help of an expert consultant? And what would be the difference in experience and output if you were to do it kind of alone?
Okay. Now, this is quite an interesting question. Yes, it is. You can do it, but it's like anything. If you haven't got the knowledge, then you're not going to be able to interpret the meaning, and you're not going to interpret what comes out of it correctly. But also it's about asking the questions, and that really is key. And what we do, and again, this isn't about consultancy for us, there are so many brilliant people that you'll find even locally that can help you with this. And I know in Australia there is a growing, I use LinkedIn on a daily basis, and I learn from LinkedIn. I'll probably spend an hour just reading what's going on in Australia, what's going on around the world. And there's brilliant things going on in Australia and some fantastic people doing this work. And some of them already using, we'll have expert panelists, etc., around the world. So, it's really important that, one, you're able to, I would say, run workshops. So for each of the groups, what we do is we will run a workshop with people involved. For example, the foundation group, on every single GDIB we run, we either get the chief exec or the managing director or general manager of the organization, together with the head of diversity, plus anybody involved in OD, anybody involved in developing strategy. So that's the first one. The internal, we get HR, we get, I'll also include the head of diversity in that as well, and anybody involved in creating those policies, practices, procedures. And the same again with foundation, anybody involved in sustainability, L&D, comms, and then the final one, anybody involved in procurement, marketing, CSR, and customer service. So when you get them involved, you can ask them the questions, but they need to be able to understand what we mean by good practice. And for each of those different sections, it is important that they're able to demonstrate. If you don't demonstrate, you don't get an X in the box. And if you don't get an X in the box, you don't, let's see, you don't actually achieve that level. But what I also find is working with a lot of organizations, they're doing so much, but they don't realize some of the things that they're doing. So when you start questioning them, you start to realize that, or they start to realize that there is a lot more that they're doing that they hadn't even realized. So by having somebody with knowledge support you, they're able to direct you, but also to bring out, to really help you shine as an organization. And also having somebody with knowledge, what they will do is they will do a narrative for each of the 15 sections, why they scored that section the way they did, and also write an action plan, a list of actions, for you to move to the next level. And the key behind those actions is, if you don't already have a strategy, you can use those actions to actually create a strategy around how you're going to achieve those actions. And really, this is about not just writing a strategy and then guessing at actions. It's about knowing what you need to do and then writing a strategy to say, this is how I'm going to do it. And to me, that's the right way of doing a strategy.
Thanks,
Thank
Gamiel.
Sorry, long-winded.
Deborah, Mohammed has a question, which I think it's a broad question, and I think anyone can answer on this. But the question is, are there certifications available? How do we get the information on these?
Well, are you talking about certifications in terms of audits, or certifications in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, training, development, etc.?
Deborah?
Hi, Deborah.
I'm so sorry. I was thinking along the lines of becoming certified in various areas of the GDEIB. Are there like specific areas like that?
There isn't at the moment, but we are working on certification.
Okay.
So we're working with a provider to look at getting to get accredited, also to looking at digitalization, but that won't be for a while.
Okay, and in terms of training and development, if I may ask another question.
There are many organizations that can give you a certification. We have 14, and I would be wrong if I didn't actually say this. We have 14 training programs all going through accreditation at the moment. 4 have just gone through. The other 10 will go through by the end of this month. But there are many others.
Okay, all right, thank you. I see Astrid has his hands up. He has a particular issue he likes. So Astrid, go ahead.
He, she, or they?
He, she, or they. Sorry, my mistake for my pronouns.
No problem. It's the hi everybody, and thank you for the interesting session.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask, because we have done an external assessment with this methodology, and so we have the mapping on how we are or where we are as an organization. Yes. And one of the 15 levels where we have a major challenge is on the leadership and accountability. And the external person said that really on those aspects of the foundation, you need to be in the level proactive to progress with a solid base. So my question is, because I'm the inclusion coordinator for our organization, which actions could you recommend to be able to work on that of leadership? Because the leadership in general, they say that they will manage themselves and we can work with the rest of the organization. So
okay. It's quite interesting. And I can't comment on the comment that the individual that assessed you, gave you. All I can do is comment on the things that I would do. And the thing is, most senior leaders don't know where they are, but we need to find ways of holding them accountable. There are lots of different things that they can do. If they're at the lower levels, so if they're at, say, reactive stage at the moment, which some of them will be, because they don't, they see this as really complex. You know, we, in terms of practitioners, see this as just good business practice. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is just about filling the gaps that already exist in our policies, practices, and procedures. But when it comes to senior leadership, they need help and support. We can do that. All of the help and support is in your organization. Most of the time, senior leaders will think that they're, well, nearly every single senior leader in an organization would genuinely believe that they are doing what's best for the organization. They will believe that they are treating everybody equally, where, you know, they will also believe that there is nobody in the organization that they treat unfairly. So they have this mindset. And really, what you need to do is show them that that mindset is wrong. And what I mean by that is they will not realize that within your organization that there is this explicit culture that they experience, and then the hidden and shadow culture that staff from minority groups experience. And you can find out that information by doing two things. One, firstly, really looking at the data that you're analyzing or that comes from your culture surveys and everything else, but then go deeper and run focus groups and actually really find out what's stopping individuals progressing. Also gather data, as much data as you can, that will show representation. I normally use 3 years. So I'll look at 3 years, look at the numbers of different ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, women, etc., coming into the organization 3 years ago, 2 years ago. Now, is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Are ethnic minorities less likely to progress? Use that data. They want evidence. And if you provide evidence, it will help. But there are loads of other things. And email me and I'll give you some more advice. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you, Astrid.
We have, thank you, Astrid. We have from Laura Gross. She's asked a question on the chat. What is the recommended cadence for how frequently an organization should measure progress with the GDEIB? Annually?
Well, actually, it depends where you are. And if you're on inactive, then my recommendation is that you start reviewing it a lot more regularly. But if you're on inactive, it basically means that you haven't started your journey. And there's a lot that you need to do to put in place. And again, just basic framework. You put in place the foundations. You put in place a strategy, you give somebody the lead, you start building your allies, you start building your ERGs. But, and you monitor along the way. You don't just start something, go back to it in a year and see if you've progressed. You continuously monitor and evaluate as you go along. So for me, it is something that you do regularly, that either if you've got a DE&I committee, then minimum once every 3 months. But you may, if you're just starting things, you may want to start reviewing a lot more regularly to make sure that it embeds itself and then progress.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions, anything burning, anything they'd like to share, any suggestions, any and if you do, you can always post it in the chat or you can raise. Yes, Amanda.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Sorry, thank you so much for all the information that you shared today. I was curious, I wanted to go back to what you shared about psychological safety in the workplace. Yes. And how that encourages diversity and equity and inclusion. And so I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about how you start that if it doesn't exist.
if it doesn't exist, then one of the simplest ways I start this is asking the question, how likely, or do you feel that you can be your authentic self in the work, authentic or true self? So by a survey, whether that's incorporated into your annual survey. So that's my first question to people. But one thing that I try and do is explain what I mean by authentic self and true self. And there's two meanings to authentic and true self. One is that you're able to uncloak your true identity in your workplace. And number two is that you're allowed to use the knowledge, experience, and skills that you bring into the workplace when you're there. So that's about your managers valuing your capability, your knowledge, your experience, and also listening to what you have to say. So I always clarify that, but I would start off by asking people, how much of their authentic self do they bring to work? And then asking the second question, why do you think that is? Or why? And some people will say, because, I'm not my authentic self because I feel judged. I'm worried about progression, and loads of different reasons. One, because of their sexual orientation, their religion and belief. They just don't feel that they will be accepted. What that does is it starts you off on that conversation and increases your awareness of how people are feeling in your organization. And then that will give you an idea of where you're at in terms of psychological safety. So that's the first thing that I do. And then, it's about building mechanisms in the organization to address that. And those mechanisms could include introducing a diversity inclusion lead, but having ERGs and having allies, but also raising the conversation and getting more data. Because once you've had that, once you know that baseline level of knowledge, once again, you can start doing focus groups and digging deeper as to why. As long as they're secure, you will get so much more information. And it is all about data and information. But sometimes you can find out whether or not people feel safe by looking at the number of women leaving your organization.
Thank you, Gamiel. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else has got anything? I'll just give you a couple of seconds just to give you an opportunity. For those of you who wish to share on LinkedIn, please, if you wish to save the chat, you can go to the chat. There are three little dots there. You can click on that and save your chat. Again, another reminder that the recording and also the slides will be shared with you. Please email. I've sent the email. Please email and ask request for it, and we will send it to you directly. If there's there's no other questions for now, I'd just like to let you know on the chat, I've posted up the next session where we will be having, that'll be in March. It's on DEI and mental health. It's giving a perspective from 3 different countries in Asia. And each one is actually giving their representation also in terms of their faith. One a Hindu, Christian, and a Muslim on that perspective. So it'll be a very interesting insight. And those of you interested, we will be posting this on our LinkedIn and other social media. So without further ado, once again, thank you. And before we end, I'd like to ask Gamiel if there's any parting words.
Well, apart from be safe, and I know we've come out of COVID, but it's still really important. My real sort of takeaway is it's not what you do for yourself that counts. It's what you do for others that really have an impact. So once again, thank you all for sharing with me, for joining us, and I wish you all the best of luck. But please join us on, look us up on LinkedIn and, you'll see more of what we do. So thank you all very much and take care.
Bye, everybody.